They fired me in the middle of the pitch. Not after, not before, during. $100 million sat on the table that night. Investors leaned forward, eyes locked on the graphs and projections I had carved from months of sleepless nights. My voice carried steady across the marble boardroom, numbers and risk models unraveling like a story only I could tell. And then HR cut me down. Effective immediately, Elise Kale is no longer with the company. The words dropped like a blade. I froze mid-sentence, pointer still aimed at the glowing screen behind me. The investors blinked in confusion, whispers rippling through the room. And before I could breathe, Damien Core slid into the silence like he'd rehearsed it. My slides, my models, continued rolling on the wall as he stepped forward, smile carved, tone smooth. "Allow me to finish her thought," he said. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was surgical. I had been erased in real time, rewritten out of my own creation. I should have walked out. I should have screamed, fought, clawed, but my body went still because every move had been choreographed, not by me, but against me. By the time I found my breath, the deal had already shifted. The investors, cautious but pliable, let Damien's voice carry the room. My models, my innovation, were applauded under his name. And me, I stood there, heart pounding, a ghost at my own execution. When the meeting ended, I wasn't escorted out. I wasn't warned or given severance. No, they had already scrubbed me. My badge locked out, my inbox gone, my seat at the table filled before the chair was cold. By morning, the press release sang Damien's praise. By afternoon, the investors toasted him as a visionary. By night, I had been reduced to nothing more than a footnote. Former strategist dismissed for instability. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the silence, a fire took root. Because if betrayal has a flavor, it isn't bitterness. It's fuel. And I was already burning. Exile is quieter than people imagine. No headlines, no explosions, just the suffocating silence of doors that don't open anymore. Recruiters stop calling, friends stop applying, LinkedIn posts from former colleagues pretend you never existed. That's where they thought I'd stay, erased, irrelevant, forgotten. Instead, I built in the shadows. The system they stole from me, ages, had been my scaffolding, but the real design was still inside my head. I called the reborn version Altiora, higher, sharper, untouchable. But Altiora couldn't be carried alone. I needed allies, not just bodies, but believers. The first was Jordan Hale. She had been Veron's risk architect, brilliant but volatile, known for paranoia, for building scenarios where markets collapsed like dominoes in a storm. Most executives dismissed her as too intense. That intensity was exactly what I needed. When I found her, she was living out of a converted warehouse, walls plastered with financial collapse maps and disaster scenarios. She opened the door, eyes bloodshot, a gunmetal thermos in her hand. "They said you were cracked," she said flatly. "I said you were unmanageable," I answered. For a moment, silence. Then Jordan smiled, sharp as a knife. "Guess we're both liars. I'm in." The second was Maylin, compliance officer, exacting, quiet. The type who notices the commas others miss, the loopholes regulators exploit years later. Veron had kept her buried in bureaucracy because she was too honest, too incorruptible. I met her in a Chinatown tea shop. She barely looked at me when I slid into the booth across from her. "You want me to help build something that spits in their face?" she said. "Yes." She sipped her tea, eyes unreadable. "Then you don't just need compliance, you need armor. And I know how to build armor." When she set the teacup down, she was mine. The third was harder. Mira, my protege. I had spent years sharpening her instincts, teaching her the patterns hidden in noise, the art of risk turned into story. She was the closest thing to legacy I had inside Veron, and Damien had promoted her. When I reached out, she answered with hesitation, her voice carrying the tremor of someone caught between loyalty and survival. "They told us you were unstable," Mira said softly, "that you'd lost perspective, that you weren't safe to follow." I swallowed the burn in my throat. "Did you believe them?" Silence stretched long, fragile as glass. Then, "I didn't want to." But Damien makes it sound so convincing. Of course he did. That was his talent. He could steal brilliance and still convince the world it had always been his. "Mira," I said quietly, "you know me better than anyone. If you stay with him, you'll inherit a ghost. If you stand with me, you'll build something that outlives us both." Her breath caught. For a moment, I thought she would say yes. But then she whispered, I can't. Not yet. The line went dead. Not an ally, not an enemy, not yet. So it began. Elise Kale, the strategist erased from her own creation, now with 2 women at her side. Jordan's paranoia, May's precision, and in the shadows of Altiora's blueprints, Mira's absence like a missing piece I refused to forget. While Veyron congratulated itself on Damien's theft, we were already building the weapon that would gut them. They thought they'd buried me, but they hadn't realized women like me don't stay buried. We turned the dirt into foundations. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived the next morning, neon buzzing in the window like a faulty heartbeat. Vinyl booths cracked with age, coffee burnt from hours on the warmer, and in the corner, Talia waited. She was Veyron's senior analyst once, sharp, ambitious, careful with her loyalties. Seeing her now, hunched over a chipped mug, her blazer draped beside her like an abandoned armor, felt like staring at someone who had chosen the wrong side of a war. Her eyes snapped to the door as I entered. Relief flickered there. Fear, too. You came, she said. I don't usually ignore midnight messages wrapped in fire, I replied, sliding into the booth opposite her. Talia pushed a folder across the table, slim but heavy. I opened it with deliberate care. Internal memos, chat transcripts, meeting minutes from weeks before the pitch. At the top of one page, Damien Core, Project Aegis Transition Plan. My throat tightened. Line after line confirmed what I'd always suspected but never proved. Veyron hadn't just discarded me. They'd engineered it. HR was instructed to manufacture grounds for dismissal. Damien would assume authorship. Public credit would be rewritten until I was little more than a ghost. One phrase underlined twice made my jaw clench. Kale is too valuable to compete, must neutralize permanently. I closed the folder, tapping my fingers once against the table to keep from shaking. So it wasn't incompetence. It wasn't bad luck. It was premeditated exile. Talia's mouth pressed thin. I tried to warn you months ago. Damien doesn't just compete, he consumes. And now, she hesitated. Now he's circling Mira. My stomach twisted. Mira? She's been told you were unstable, that you lost perspective. Damien promoted her to keep her close. But? Talia's eyes searched mine. I think she knows something's wrong. The folder between us felt radioactive. Why tell me this now? Because I'm done, she said, her voice cracking. I watched him steal from you, and I told myself it was survival. But Damien is poison, and if I don't stop him, I'm no better than he is. I studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in months, I allowed myself a small smile. Then maybe you're exactly who I need. Back in my Jersey office, Altiora's walls grew thicker. With Talia's documents, I had proof. But proof alone doesn't topple men like Damien. They thrive on doubt, on narrative, on charm spun into fact. So I played the game differently. I isolated. Emails unanswered, calls ignored, every Veyron contact blocked. To the world, Elise Kale had vanished, broken, bitter, irrelevant. But in silence, Altiora sharpened. Jordan Hale built catastrophe scenarios like a general planning for siege. Malin sealed regulatory armor tight enough to withstand a war. Mira lingered in the shadows of my thoughts, torn between the man who promised her power and the woman who had once given her purpose. And me? I refined Altiora until it no longer resembled Aegis. This wasn't just a rebirth. It was evolution. Still, Mira haunted me. So I tested her. Through a burner email, masked, I sent 4 words. Do you trust him? For days, nothing. Then late one night, a reply blinked into existence. I don't know anymore. Seconds later, the message vanished, deleted. But the seed was planted. Meanwhile, Damien painted the world with stolen colors. The financial press adored him. Magazines called him the architect of tomorrow. Aegis's launch event filled glossy spreads, his grin plastered under the headline. Damien Core's masterstroke. But numbers are cruel. Investors whispered about inconsistencies. Questions arose about derivations Damien dodged with bravado, but no precision. Every slip made the cracks wider. And while Veyron's shine dulled, Altiora glowed brighter in my hands. Then came the summons. A week after Talia's confession, an email slid into my inbox. No subject, masked relay. They think you're gone. You'll prove them wrong. Meet us Friday, Pier 17, midnight. Attached was a list of names. Investors, high level, the same who'd sat in that marble boardroom when I was erased. Sophia Lang led the list. My pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. This was alignment. The very people Damien had stolen to impress were preparing to hand me the knife. On Friday, the pier loomed dark against the Hudson. The private lounge at its corner glowed warm inside. I entered 5 minutes early. And there they were. Sophia Lang, Gregor Tan, Veronica Steele. Titans of capital, seated like a tribunal. The same faces that had once watched me be erased. Sophia's gaze locked on me. "Elise Kale," she said, not unkindly. "You've been hard to find." I met her stare. Disappearing was the point. Gregor leaned forward, expression sharp. "And now you've reappeared. Why?" I placed my folder on the table. Altiora's real models. Executable, refined, alive. No theatrics, no smoke, just numbers. Damien's empire is a facade. He can charm, but charm doesn't hold under pressure. Results do. And results are mine. The room fell silent. Papers shifted, eyes narrowed. Finally, Veronica leaned back, her lips curling. "Damien sells mirrors. You build steel." Sophia's gaze didn't waver. "You understand if we side with you, Damien will come at you with everything. Veyron will weaponize contracts, courts, headlines. Are you ready for that war?" I held her stare, steady as stone. "I don't need to fight Damien. I'll let him fight himself. He's already rotting from within. All I have to do is give it light." Sophia studied me a moment longer, then closed the folder with a snap. "You'll have your chance. We'll suspend commitment to Veyron. Tomorrow morning, they'll know why. Because of you." When I stepped back into the night air, the Hudson biting against my skin, I whispered the truth I hadn't dared until now. They isolated me. Now, I'll isolate them. And for the first time since that night of betrayal, the tide began to turn. The boardroom hadn't changed. The same marble table, the same glass walls reflecting the city skyline, the same cold air that hummed with money and menace. But I had. Months ago, I stood here mid-sentence, silenced, stripped, erased. Damien had stolen my voice. Today, I walked in with investors at my back. Sophia Lang led the way, heels striking sharp as gunfire. Gregor Tam and Veronica Steele followed, their presence alone enough to tilt balance sheets. Their shadows fell across Damien's kingdom like an eclipse. Inside, the board had already gathered, executives in designer suits. Damien at the head of the table, grin cut like glass, basking in the illusion of control. When he saw me, the grin faltered for just a breath. He recovered fast, his voice smooth. "Well, look who crawled back." I didn't reply, I didn't need to. Sophia spoke first. "This meeting is no longer Damien's show," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the room. "We're here for a vote of confidence, and the candidate isn't him." Gasps rippled across the table. Damien's smirk tightened. "You can't be serious. After everything we've built?" "What you built was theft dressed as vision, and we're done funding it." All eyes turned to me. For a moment, silence pressed against my lungs. Then I slid the folder across the polished marble. Altiora's models, my proof, my rebirth. Altiora is alive. It is beyond Aegis, beyond what Damien even understood. You invested in him because he made you believe. Now invest in me because I deliver. Veronica leaned forward, eyes on Damien. "We reviewed her numbers. They hold. Yours don't." Gregor followed, voice low but lethal. "Our funds are pulling out, effective immediately." The board erupted in shouts, some loyal to Damien, others too stunned to speak. Damien rose, his hand slamming the table. "This is a coup!" His voice cracked with anger, not charm. "She's nothing, a disgraced strategist with no company, no leverage." "Correction," she said. "She has our leverage now, which means she has all of it." For the first time, Damien's mask slipped entirely, his face contorted, veins visible against his temple. "You think you can tear me down with her? She's unstable, she's vindictive, she is the only reason you ever had Aegis in the first place," I said, my voice cutting through his like a blade. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Minutes later, the vote was called. Investors against Damien, executives split. Fearful, calculating. But the tide was irreversible. Damien sat there as names were read, one by one slipping like sand through his grip. By the end, the tally wasn't close. Confidence in Damien Core dissolved. Confidence in Elise Kale secured. It wasn't official yet. Veyron's bylaws would drag this out, but the battlefield had shifted. I was no longer an exile. I was the rival. After the meeting, Damien found me in the hall. His voice was low, venom curling around each word. "You think this is victory? It isn't. Investors are fickle. They love a spectacle. Today it's you. Tomorrow it's someone else. And when they're done with you, I'll still be standing.
I stepped closer, my heels echoing against the marble. Standing on what? Ashes? Because that's all you'll have left when I'm through. For a moment, the mask dropped entirely. His eyes blazed with something raw, almost desperate. Not just rage. Fear. You don't know what you've started, he hissed. No, you don't know what I finished. And I walked away, leaving him in the ruins of the empire he thought he owned. That night, Mira called me. Her voice trembled through the line. I saw what happened today. Damien's unraveling. The way he screamed at the staff after. Elise, he's not the man he pretends to be. I closed my eyes, relief and sorrow mingling. You know the truth now. That's what matters. Silence hung for a beat. Then Mira whispered, I want to help you. My chest tightened. I'd waited months to hear those words. Then stand with me. When the final strike comes, stand with me. Across the river, in his penthouse office, Damien sat alone. The whiskey glass in his hand shook slightly. Screens flashed headlines of the investor revolt. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls. He stared at the city lights, jaw tight, mind racing. Beneath the fury, beneath the humiliation, one truth gnawed him. He wasn't fighting Elise Kale anymore. He was fighting the fire he had lit himself. And fire has no mercy.
The first cracks didn't come from investors. They came from the press. One article in the Financial Review, barely 2 pages long, but lethal in its precision. The Aegis illusion. Has Damien Core oversold the future? It spread like fire. Journalists circled, analysts dug into inconsistencies. Numbers didn't align, graphs contradicted themselves. The story built momentum, dragging Damien's reputation down one headline at a time. By the second week, lawsuits followed. Shareholders filed for fraud. Regulators opened inquiries. Banks began pulling credit lines. Damien raged in public, branding it all as jealous sabotage. But in private, the walls of Iran trembled. His executives whispered escape plans. Loyalists resigned overnight. The marble empire began to crumble into dust. And I, Elise Kale, stood at the center, not as victim, but as architect. Because every article, every leak, every buried inconsistency had a source. Me. Talia funneled internal memos, Jordan crafted disaster narratives, May slipped regulatory flaws into the right inboxes. Altiora didn't just grow in silence, it cut Veyron apart piece by piece. The final blow came from Mira. She walked into my office late one night, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but burning with resolve. She carried a single flash drive. This is everything, she said. Internal correspondence, doctored forecasts, falsified compliance reports. Damien's fingerprints are everywhere. My chest tightened. Mira, do you understand what this means? If we release this, there's no coming back for him. Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. I understand. He promised me mentorship, but all he gave me was lies. You gave me the truth, even when it hurt. I'm done being his pawn. I reached across the desk, my hand covering hers. Then you're not his pawn anymore. You're my equal. For the first time in weeks, Mira smiled. The next morning, headlines detonated like grenades. Whistleblower exposes Core's fabricated models. Regulators raid Veyron offices. Investors flee as Aegis implodes. By midday, trading on Veyron stock was halted. By evening, Damien was subpoenaed. By night, the empire he stole collapsed under its own weight. And I stood on the stage across the river, unveiling Altiora. Not with fireworks, not with theatrics, just with results. Numbers that held, models that sang with precision, proof of concept already in pilot trials. The investors who had once abandoned me leaned forward, hungry, ready. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. Damien tried to fight. He screamed at cameras, branding me as unstable, untrustworthy. He claimed Mira had been coerced, that Sophia Lang had orchestrated a coup, that Veyron was the victim of corporate terrorism. But the more he spoke, the smaller he became. His charm cracked, his polish faded. What once looked like vision now reeked of desperation. In one interview, his voice broke entirely. Elise Kale is nothing without me, he spat, sweat beading at his temple. The headline the next day? Is Damien Core obsessed with his former protege? That was when I knew he was finished. Not because of the evidence, not because of the lawsuits, but because the world had seen through him. The mask was gone. Weeks later, I returned to the boardroom where it all began. Not as an exile, not as a ghost, but as a guest of honor. Sophia Lang herself had arranged it. The surviving investors gathered, no longer under Damien's thumb, but searching for new ground. Altiora will not be a product, I told them, my voice calm, measured. Not smoke, not mirrors, not charm, steel.
And those who build with steel, not glass, will own the future. They listened, they nodded, and one by one, they signed. Damien hadn't just lost investors, he'd lost the future. That night, alone on my balcony, I let the silence settle. For months, my life had been fire and knives, betrayal and revenge. Now there was space to breathe, space to exist beyond survival. But vengeance is strange. It doesn't taste sweet. It tastes inevitable. And inevitability doesn't comfort. It simply is. Behind me, the city lights shimmered. Somewhere, Damien sat in a penthouse stripped of power, drowning in lawsuits and debts, shouting into empty phones. And me? I was no longer the woman they erased. I was the woman they couldn't erase. Elise Kill, founder of Altiora. The name Damien Core would never escape. Because in the end, history remembers builders, not thieves. And I had built something he could never steal again.
The fall of Damien Core didn't come with explosions or headlines of arrest. It came quietly, like rot finally collapsing a structure from within. By the time the lawsuit stacked high enough to choke him, by the time regulators stripped his licenses, by the time banks froze his accounts, he was already finished. What remained of Veyron was auctioned off in fragments. His name became shorthand for arrogance, a cautionary tale whispered in finance classrooms. And still he raged. From his penthouse, from closed-door interviews, from desperate phone calls to investors who no longer answered. He clawed at the air like a man drowning in shadows. But the world had moved on. The world had moved to me. Altera's headquarters were modest at first, a converted warehouse by the Hudson, glass walls reflecting the skyline. Inside, chaos. Engineers hunched over terminals, analysts sprawled with data charts, lawyers drafting frameworks that could withstand any war. But beneath the frenzy, there was clarity. Every move Damien had mocked as overly cautious, every detail he'd called obsessive, became the foundation of Altera's rise. We didn't sell promises, we delivered results. Within 6 months, our pilot programs outperformed projections. Within a year, Altera wasn't a startup anymore. It was the axis investors leaned toward. And me? I stopped introducing myself as formerly a Veyron. Now people introduce themselves to me. Mira stood by my side, no longer a protege torn between loyalties, but a partner sharpened by betrayal. She handled operations with precision, her quiet fire anchoring me on days when ambition threatened to consume everything. Jordan Hale, strategist turned war general, crafted Altera's growth like campaigns, every step designed to dominate territory Damien had once claimed. Malin became the fortress, compliance so airtight that regulators began using our models as examples. And Talia, once Damien's analyst, now mine, proved invaluable. Her memory of his tactics, his manipulations, his shortcuts, kept us 2 steps ahead of every imitator who tried to rise in his ashes. I didn't just have allies. I had a legion. And yet victory carried weight. Some nights, when the office lights dimmed and the city glowed like circuitry across the river, I wondered if Damien still thought of me. If he stared at the skyline and saw Altera's rise as a blade buried in his chest. I wondered if the fire that once fueled me would burn forever, or if, now that I stood above the ruins, it would finally fade. The truth? It didn't fade. It transformed. Because revenge is a spark, but empire is the fire that endures. Months later, at a global summit in Geneva, I stood before the kind of audience Damien once craved. Heads of state, investors, visionaries, all waiting for me. I spoke not of betrayal, not of war, not of vengeance. I spoke of Altera as the standard, of resilience built into its bones, of transparency as strength. When the applause came, it wasn't for a survivor. It was for a leader. And in the quiet after, as cameras flashed and hands reached to shake mine, I realized the final truth. Damien had always wanted to be a legend, but legends built on theft turn to dust. Builders become history, and I was a builder. The last time I heard Damien's name was in a news ticker months later. Former Veyron CEO Damien Core files bankruptcy amid mounting debts. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the paper. Because Damien Core was already gone. And Elise Kale, I was just beginning. From ashes, empire. From silence, steel. From erasure, eternity.
Altera wasn't a company. It was a monument, and I carved it from the bones of the man who thought he could erase me.